42. Back in the cave where Wick had recovered from the black ooze, Gryph laid out his plan. According to Ovrim, Dirge was the leader of the Grey Company, a group of mercenaries, thieves, and killers. Ovrim had taken up with them while searching for his one-time mentor, Zeren. Zeren was searching for a Godhead. He had found an ancient text that suggested one existed on Corin, left unclaimed. I didn't believe it. Godheads were mere legends, and, coming to Corin, violated the Accords. The Outer Realms may not interfere with this realm. So, by joining him, I sealed my fate. The Zaidai fell silent. Both Gryph and Wick gave him time. Without him, Ovrim hesitated again. I should have stopped him, but he'd become obsessed, and the quest drove him mad. Emotion surged into Ovrim. In his madness, he suspected me, claimed that I would take the Godhead from him. Even then, I didn't believe he would do it. Even then, I thought there was hope. But he was too far gone. We battled, and he defeated me. He could have killed me, but he left me wounded, dying. A farmer woman found me, and she nursed me back to health. Me, a demon from the old tales. It was then that I realized what I had to do, no matter what the cost. If this woman could risk her life for a stranger, then I must do the same for the man who raised me. I tracked him to a city a few days' ride from here, and learned that he had gone to the mountains to the west. Legend told of an ancient city, long abandoned by the Thalmir, the High Dwarves. It was said to contain a great treasure, an ancient weapon. The Godhead? Gryph asked. Ovrim eyed Gryph. Zeren thought it to be true. He was lost, but no fool. Ovrim explained how he had met up with the Grey Company, convinced them of the wealth to be had. En route, they had become seduced by the Barrow. We fought and died, and the Barrow King came for us. Then, after several days, the attacks just stopped. Dirge? Wick asked. Ovrim nodded. He'd somehow made a parlay. None of us asked questions, not even me. It turned out that the parlay came with a cost. Dirge had broken the code of brotherhood by offering members of the Grey Company as a sacrifice. Every 3 months, he'd select a member he felt was a rival to his power or otherwise expendable, and would take them on patrol. Invariably, the group would return with one less member, and the Barrow King would leave us be for a time. I suppose I didn't want to know how he'd done it. The men who he sacrificed are as much on my conscience as Dirge's, yet I did nothing, Ovrim said. Until Dirge decided it was my turn. Dirge has a strong mind and could shield his intentions, but his 2 cohorts did not, Ovrim said. Birek, the uglier of the 2, couldn't stop thinking about what he could kill once he had his hands on my saber. That's how I knew. I felt his thoughts. I would have killed them all, but Dirge sensed my intent, and I only just escaped. I left him with a parting gift, though. The scar? Gryph asked. Ovrim nodded, and a thin smile curled his lips. We will use his own nature against him. It had taken some convincing, but Zeg had finally agreed to the plan. The imp disappeared in a puff of sulfur and flame. Ovidum made an antidote to the paralytic that Dirge favored. Then they waited. When the time came, they downed the antidote, suited up, and opened the secret door. The Grey Company was waiting. Wick stumbled from the tent where Dirge and Gryph were getting chummy. Feigning anger at Gryph was easy for Wick. Despite the logic of the plan, fear bit at Wick's soul. He turned the fear to anger and feigned drunkenness. After his last confrontation with Gryph, he'd climbed up to the old guard spot and snuggled under the blankets. To all peering eyes, he was fast asleep. He waited an agonizing hour before peering out from his hiding spot. Down below, he could see the back of the hooded guard keeping watch over the well they'd tossed Ovidum down. His eyes scanned the rest of the cavern. From his perch, Wick could see the entire village. Nobody was looking his way. He had played the role of angry drunk perfectly. Wick eased himself over the edge and dropped to the ground. He skirted by several tents with stealth born to his small size. Snores and grunts popped here and there, but he encountered no one. Soon, he slithered up behind the lone guard. Ovidum had not known if this man was part of Dirge's group of traitors or not, so he had insisted that Wick keep him alive. The same poison Dirge favored coated the tip of Wick's blade. He snuck up behind the man and, like a cobra striking from the shadows, nicked the man's exposed hand. "What the?" was all he managed before the poison did its work and the man slumped. Wick tossed a rope into the well. A moment later, Ovidum eased himself over the lip of the well and landed as silently as a mouse next to Wick. They bound and gagged the man and eased him down into the well, making sure to hide his features. Then Ovidum took his place and Wick hid. Soon, Dirge and his minions emerged from Gryph's tent with a man-sized sack. 2 arrows sailed up to Wick's one-time hiding spot, slaying the pile of rags. Then the traitor came over to the well. Ovidum tensed, but kept his cool as Dirge looked into the well. "Goodbye, old friend," Dirge said in a low voice. He nodded to his cohort, who sunk 2 arrows into the bound form at the bottom of the well. For a moment, Ovidum felt a pang of guilt, but then realized if Dirge was so casual about murder, then the guard Ovidum was masquerading as was part of Dirge's crew. Perhaps this was justice. Dirge and his crew moved out. "It's time," Ovidum said. Wick emerged from the shadows. They stopped at the cage that held Zeg, and Wick nodded. The small demon grinned a mouthful of needle-sharp teeth and disappeared in a puff of rancid smoke. They dipped into sneak and followed the 3 traitors. Ovidum had no idea how Dirge had parleyed with the Barrow King, but the way to the depths of the barrow was clear of enemies. No vermin rushed them from hidden corridors, and the dead stayed dead. So far, both sides were keeping the bargain. When Gryph suggested this plan, Ovidum thought it had a slim chance at success. While he still had his doubts, he now believed they at least had a fighting chance. They kept to the shadows and always a turn or two behind Dirge and his cronies. Eventually, they came to the massive door that marked the entrance to the barrow's inner sanctum. They stopped.
"You realize that this entire plan relies on a demon of the chthonic realm, right?"
Wick said. "That's why Gryph called it a Hail Mary. I do not know what kind of god this Mary is, but if she helps us get through this, I'll make whatever sacrifice she desires." Wick nodded, And then they waited. Seconds felt like hours, but soon their patience was rewarded.
Psst, you stupid ugly things. Look up. Zeg here.
Ovrim and Wick looked down the corridor, where Zeg's head hung upside down, dangling through a small square hatch. "Thank you, Mary," Wick said, as the two men rushed to the hatch, careful not to disturb the undead sentinels in their receded alcoves. Ovrim boosted Wick. Wick held his hand down, but the warrior monk just nodded no and jumped into the small crawlspace. Wick nodded in appreciation and closed the hatch again. They moved down the thin shaft, scattering a few rats, spiders, and things with hundreds of legs. Soon they came to a grate that overlooked a balcony. Below, they could hear dirge, and something much, much worse. Ovrim closed his eyes, and his fingers moved as if unbidden by the conscious mind. The 4 points that held the grate to the wall parted, and the grate fell forward. Wick grabbed the grating with his right hand before it could fall to the ground. The weight of the grate pulled at Wick's fingers. Gnomes weren't known for their strength, and he panicked. Ovrim's eyes snapped open, and a hand lashed out to grab the grate before the heavy iron could smash to the ground. Wick breathed a heavy, silent breath, and Ovrim gave him a sideways glance of apology. They eased the grate against the wall and clambered out. Ovrim pulled his bow from his back. Wick admired the intricate scrollwork that ran up and down the fine weapon. The buzz of potential inside its taut length was palpable. Wick pulled on his maker goggles and prepped himself. A wet, squelching crunch caused both men to snap their eyes down to Zeg. The tiny demon had a fat spider clasped in its hands and was tearing off its legs. Each leg pulled free with a wet tear, and then the demon stuffed it into its mouth. Then came the unpleasant crunch. Zeg was in a world of his own, thoroughly enjoying this disgusting treat. Wick nudged the imp with his knee, and Zeg nearly cried out in irritation before scowling up at Wick. Wick gave the universal "shut the hell up" look, and for once, Zeg seemed abashed. As if making up for the faux pas, the imp offered Wick a leg. Wick shook his head in disgust, earning a silent chuckle from Ovrim. Zeg shrugged and tossed the half-chomped spider aside. The poor creature pulled itself away on half legs. Zeg saw the spider slime on its hands and grimaced, before looking from Wick to its hands and back to Wick. Realizing what was about to happen, Wick reached out to stop the imp, but he was too late, and a melange of spider guts joined the other muck staining his clothes. Wick felt the urge to punch the imp, but knew they still needed its help to save Tifila. He could not see her, but Zeg had told them she was in a cage somewhere against the wall below the balcony on which they now stood. He could feel her through their bond and forced his will into the ring at his throat. "I'm coming, my love," he thought. Ovrim cast another spell, and Wick felt other minds inside his own. It wasn't like he was sharing one mind, but more like these other voices were hovering right out of his perception. He heard a calm voice in his head. "Zeg, once we attack, you go free Tifila and get her to safety," Ovrim said inside Wick's head.
Zeg will save pretty lady, tall demon eyes.
Wick's mind recoiled at the oily slipperiness of Zeg's mind. The imp was most assuredly not of this realm. Wick felt a schematic of the room pop into his mind, and he knew Ovrim's plan. They would hide on opposite ends of the balcony and would take out the dread knights closest to Gryph, giving him the time to get free. Wick nodded and moved silently to his position. Down below, he could see Gryph on his knees with Dirge's dagger at his throat. A portal to a wondrous place of green shimmered in front of them. Then there was the Barrow King. Wick's mind and soul told him to flee. Fear bubbled up inside of him at the sight of the revenant whose nature was so unnatural as to make Zeg seem like the fairest of elf maidens. Whatever the Barrow King was, he had perverted not only his nature, but his immortal soul. Wick forced his fear away. 8 dread knights lined the walls, along with the 2 standing guard at the Barrow King's feet. Shoving his fear away with a deep breath, Wick summoned chthonic energy around his hand and waited. Eons passed, until a single word pulsed into his mind. Now.